Globalization has taught African countries that our economies acting alone and independently cannot remain competitive because there is little hope to secure the highest benefits of expanded transportation systems, modern technology, and vast capital investments, which can only justify its economics in serving a large population and expansive markets. Globalization has made it difficult for African countries with their small and weak economies to compete and survive. The quest for African industrial revolution can be realized when large markets drive competitive production to satisfy demand and supply with the support of appropriate national policies. The various economic models experimented by African countries have failed to yield the desired results because of the weak capacities and small markets of African economies, in addition to the negative effects of trade barriers. Development within the confines of our independent statehood cannot succeed in this uneven global playing field as we struggle at all times against coercive pressures, both external and domestic. By striving to develop individually as independent states through individual national planning, our rate of progress will continue to stagnate and our individual developments will continue to be slow-paced no matter how intensive our efforts. It is time for sub-Saharan African countries to put aside the self-inflicting roadblocks to integrate, unite, and consolidate rapidly to share each other's burden, pay each other's debts, and grow on each other's strength because we are one people of the same land with a common destiny. An integrated regional merging of our land areas, our populations, and our resources is what is needed to give substantive meaning to our drive to advance from our present underdeveloped state to the level of advanced development comparable to today's advanced nations. The larger potential of greater land area and demographic dividend, which promotes economics of scale, would offer greater attraction to outside investment, capital because of their anticipated higher profitability ratio, and this is what African people need now. In sub-Saharan Africa, the uncommitted attempts at integration in the region by African leaders for over 6 decades has made the very elementary stages of integration, such as the free movement of people, goods, and services, yet to materialize. There is therefore no decisive commitment to a common currency, a common central bank, a federal parliament, a common government, and nothing like the higher levels of integration. We want to see the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital, including the right of residence throughout our region, materialize. We need a union of mass recognition, mass support, mass participation, mass protection, and mass defense. Sub-Saharan Africa needs deep and greater political, economic, and social integration through the establishment of a union. Sub-Saharan Africa yearns to move quickly beyond a free trade area in which member countries eliminate tariffs and other restrictions on all trade with other member countries, but each country does retain its own trade policies towards non-member states, as promoted by the African Continental Free Trade Area. And instead, we prefer to go past a customs union in which member countries exhibit the characteristics of a free trade and have a common harmonized external tariff that is applied toward outside states. Our region must work to leap past the stage of a common market in which member countries exhibit the characteristics of a customs union in addition to the free mobility of the factors of production, especially labor, capital, among countries in a region. Our region must work to establish the higher platform of integration of an economic union in which member states exhibit the characteristics of a common market and a harmonized all industrial, regional, transport, fiscal, and monetary policies which will mature to include a monetary union with a common currency, and African people likely to build and integrate and unite. African people ultimately need to establish a political union in the region, which will see member states exhibit the characteristics of an economic union, in addition to harmonizing member states' foreign and defense policies under a common union. Our people want a deep union, a strengthened union, an integrated union. The separate states retain unimpaired their individual sovereignty in respect of the residual powers not allotted to the union, but member countries delegate to a federal government certain powers or functions inherent in themselves, especially in ceding the powers of their foreign ministries and defense ministries to the union to facilitate our expansive development and collective protection against invasion, exploitation, and internal conflicts. Our region needs a unified military, security, and defense policy, in addition to a common trade, defense, and foreign policy that will present our federal government with a common front and make our union great and strong. Now is the time for English-speaking African countries, Portuguese-speaking African countries, French-speaking African countries, and all the countries in our union, in our region, to unite for development and security guarantees. African countries must free themselves of the colonial hold and pull together in a union for sustained development. In addition to the small and weak African economies continue to fail in the delivery of economic goals because of politically motivated programs, bad government policies, retention of state-dependent moribund public sector, and corruption, which plays a negative role in economic development. Most state-owned enterprises have over the years become permanent national liability owing to deep-seated corruption of the managers and a carefree attitude of workers. Public corporations often fail to provide the badly needed goods and services for which they were set up. Gross inefficiency, low productivity, and huge debts continue to make maximum state ownership of enterprises unattractive. Businesses are established to provide goods and services to satisfy social and economic needs. If the private sector or joint private government companies can provide the needed goods and services, then that should be the norm. The goal must be to ensure higher productivity, elimination of poverty, and equitable distribution of national wealth. It is important for African governments to open most sectors of the economy to competition if the approach is to benefit consumers. This will facilitate the turnaround of national economies, which in most cases has become largely inefficient and has not augured well for most African countries. Statism, which is state control of maximum economic activity, continue to breed as its consequence apathy, inefficiency, and corruption, which is deeply associated with most of the state-owned enterprises. Corruption, which is the use of government office and government networks for illegitimate private gain, continue to fester disproportionately in the government sector. In most African countries, the different forms of corruption include bribery, kickbacks, extortion, cronyism, nepotism, patronage, influence peddling, grafts, embezzlement, and others. And most of these ills are associated with state business. In most African countries, where the state controls major sectors of the economy, economic growth is more evident in the gross domestic product numbers than what obtains on the ground. Improvement in the well-being of African people, increase in employment, rise in individual wealth, and industrial development are hardly evident in these African economies that record economic growth. The institutionalization of a strong private sector will facilitate the establishment of a solid economic base for the fulfillment of such human needs as accommodation, health, education, water supply, energy, food, clothing, and pensions for people, just as incomes, jobs, and livelihoods will also be scaled. African countries must actively promote public-private partnerships, embrace privatization and private sector to reduce rampant corruption, as well as commit to the full insertion of our integrated economy into the global market. The establishment of a union will strengthen African countries, build our industrial capacities, deepen public-private partnerships, promote privatization, undertake domestic economic expansion-led growth, and employ economies of scale and embrace an export-led growth agenda to speed up sustained development. The boosting of intra-African trade and the deepening of African markets and integration through the establishment of a union will foster competition among African countries, assist in enhancing the capacity of African economies, and prepare African countries to compete more effectively on a global market. It is important for Africa to become an active participant and be fully integrated into the global value chains, not as an upstream supplier of primary raw materials and natural resources, but with major roles for industrialization, manufacturing, and other industrial and service products. Industrialization is the key to ensuring that sub-Saharan Africa's fast-growing population yields a demographic dividend and not a demographic trap. Industrialization will create the needed jobs to address the rising unemployment problem in Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa needs an economic model that will succeed in taking millions of our population out of deprivation, unemployment, and inequality within the shortest possible time.